just for that, Joel, I'm going to send you Attack of the Eye Creatures, which I was going to do anyway. Push the button, Frank.
That's okay. You'll get him next time. You'll be okay.
Would you put that thing down? God.
This time we watch Season 4, Episode 18, Attack of the Eye Creatures.
Truly an highlight of the Joel era.
But first, some follow-up.
Yes, thank you to everybody who sent in lots of nice notes and emails and tweets about how good Charlotte is at her new gig. I agree with all of you.
And I am so appreciative. That's so nice of you guys all to say such good things. It made me feel super good.
Yay! We got one particular one that I want to read out. An email that goes, "Hello, Charlotte and Chris. Longtime host, first-time commenter. I just wanted to say I listened to the first episode with Charlotte on Beyond Atlantis, and I was delighted to hear her enthusiasm in talking all things MST3K. As for the episode, yes, the legends are true, Nollywood is real, and I was pleased to discover a gem of a movie trailer many moons ago that, in true It's Just a Show fashion, I must share with you. Listeners, you'll find link in the show notes. Much like Charlotte's habit of quoting the episode Alien from LA, I may have rung in the cursed new year of 2016 by screaming, "Ta-ta-ta-ta 2016!" as can be heard at the end of that beautiful trailer. Anyway, I must return to my hot fish shop on the sunny beaches of Newfoundland. Good night, and may a good news be yours. And keep up the good work. Love, Adam.
Thank you, Adam. What nice comments to send. And I don't even remember how I rang in 2016, but it certainly wasn't anything nearly as exciting as that.
Did you enjoy the that trailer?
Yeah.
You want to try to describe it for everybody?
It's... Wow. How to describe the 2016 trailer. The Terminator's in it, but the Terminator's also not in it. It's like there was a green screen for the Terminator, but not for the people who are actually living in the movie. And then there's cars being blown up and thrown all over the place. And I have no idea what this movie is about. Is there a storyline at all that's showing? It's hard because, of course, they're speaking in another language, and there were no subtitles translating for me. So as a person who doesn't speak the language being spoken, I don't know if they're actually referencing some sort of plot. But yeah, wow, the Terminator's frame is awesome.
There's also the alien is in there from the movie Alien.
That's right. Oh my gosh.
I'm going to be a little bit of a wet squib here, which you know I hate to do.
I think secretly you love it, and our listeners know.
I know. This movie is not actually from Nollywood. It's a movie from Ghana, which is just a few countries over. Mm-hmm. And it does exist. It came out in 2010. I don't know if many people have watched it. The Wikipedia page for it, which does not give a plot summary, suggests that its budget is an estimated 0.
Oh, well,
which can't
that makes
be
sense.
true. But
I don't know. It just looks like somebody filming their friends and then throwing in the Terminator because why not? Terminators, cars, explosions, and my friends. This is a perfect afternoon.
Well, absolutely. Thank you again, Adam. That was great. I hadn't seen that trailer before. It was delightful. You know what another perfect way to spend an afternoon or an evening is watching the latest MST3K episode that drops, in this case, early 90s film Munchie.
Yeah, I'm afraid I had to miss it this week due to, the life scheduling around everything. How was watching that with our fans in the Slack?
Well, it was a terrifying experience because it's kind of a terrifying movie in many ways, but it's a great episode.
Terrifying? I saw the trailer for Munchie on the Gizmoplex, and it doesn't look terrifying. I mean, they sing the song of the WB Frog. How terrifying can this movie be?
I don't know if you saw Munchie, the lead character, who is like a puppet that is voiced by Dom DeLuise and refuses to move when it should, and parts of it move when you don't want them to. There's a scene where it's sleeping and its little upper lip is flapping as it breathes, and it's the most disgusting thing I've ever seen.
Sorry.
Lonnie Anderson puts in a good turn as the character she always plays. We'll talk about this episode someday, but it was great and continues to be just a really strong season.
So you're talking it was horrifying the way that seeing bad puppetry is horrifying, or the movie itself was actually scary?
The movie was upsetting, but it's more about the bad puppetry and so forth.
Fair enough. Fair enough.
But that's a movie for another day. Right now, I think it's time for us to start talking about today's experiment, Attack of the Eye Creatures. Shall we do it?
Absolutely.
I think you meant to say aye, aye.
Aye, aye, Captain. Aye, aye, Captain Chris.
There we go. This time, we watched Season 4, Episode 18, Attack of the Eye Creatures. Old Man Bailey just wanted a quiet life, alone in the woods, away from the hustle and bustle of civilization. Unfortunately, his humble home is just outside of a town filled with sex-crazed pests, right by a secluded spot that the locals use as make-out point. Dang smoochers always on his property. But on this night, it's not just teenage smoochers hanging out by Old Man Bailey's house. Some aliens have landed as well. The U.S. government swoops in, sort of moseys in eventually, to cover up what's going on and prevent the public from panicking over an alien invasion. The government is of middling competence at best, though. The higher-ups are jaded and self-satisfied, and the grunts are, they're also sex pests who use their high-tech surveillance equipment to spy on the teens making out rather than looking for aliens. Our heroes, technically, I guess, are Stan, who's played by Earl Holliman, who's played by John Ashley, and his girlfriend, Susan. They are planning to elope tonight, but as they drive out to make out point, Stan drives his car right into one of the aliens, killing it. The aliens are humanoid, but covered in white blobs, which I guess are supposed to be eyes. It's a muddy print. Anyway, Stan and Susan are freaked out and try to convince Old Man Bailey to let them call the police. But when the police get there, they find the body of Carl Fenton, a sex pest drifter who has moved into town recently with his friend, the sweater dress-wearing Mike Lawrence. Carl stumbles upon the body of the alien that Stan and Susan killed, and then gets ambushed by other aliens and has a heart attack and dies. The police arrive and think that Stan and Susan killed Carl. Ruh-roh, how are they going to get out of this mess? Unfortunately, Stan and Susan are just too young to be taken seriously by law enforcement. John Ashley was a mere babe of, 32 years when the film was made. So, Stan and Susan escape the police station, steal a cop car, find Mike, tell him his friend is dead, take him out to see the aliens, get ambushed by the aliens, and run away, leaving Mike behind. And eventually our lovers learn that if you hit these aliens with bright lights, they explode. And so they round up all the teens at Makeout Point, drive down to the aliens, and have all the kids flash their headlights at them. Pop! Whoosh! All the aliens explode, and the kids save the day. Not that any of those dang grown-ups will ever believe them. Oh, and no one ever thanks Old Man Bailey for letting them smooch on his property, the ungrateful kids. The end.
Meanwhile, on the Satellite of Love, Tom and Crow are friends, best friends, and Joel invites us to observe this phase of their development. What do you want to do, friend? Whatever you want to do, pal. But the friendship between Tom and Crow turns into the I don't like you malice of fourth grade girls quicker than, that self-same elementary school playground. It's invention exchange time. The Mads have invented the Router Ouija board, which will contact the souls of dead woodworkers to bring a message from the beyond. Bless this mess. While I doubt these are the words Ethan Allan would send, I do look forward to seeing the Lathe of Heaven next time. Joel upscales the squirter phone, digitizing it for the 90s into the squirter fax, allowing jokesters to cross hundreds of miles. Though the real question is, how did he get Dr. Forrester to be a convert so quickly? At movie break, Tom sits behind a steering wheel and he wants to make out. He gets a solid no from Crow, and while GPC compliments Tom on his sweet ride, her interest in making out is less fervent. Even Magic Voice is not interested, even if they did have corporeal form. Tom says he's never been kissed, except on his arm, never tasted lips. And he has so many questions, like, why? Why does one make out? And once you've started, how do you know when you're done? Quite the burning enigma. There's only one being left on the satellite of love, Joel. He comes up and smooches Tom right on his little parrot beak and says, I've always wanted to do that. It's worth noting Joel apologizes for the surprise kiss as they re-enter the movie theater, proving that there are some guys who know surprise kisses are not okay. At intermission, Joel and the bots celebrate Earl Holliman. They proceed to make a case for Earl Holliman with such high praise as he saved us from our own ennui. They celebrate his legacy of averageness, referencing his time on Policewoman and his turn on Delta with Delta Burke. Joel and the bots do this while wearing big hair wigs, just like the one in today's movie. And why Earl Holliman, you might ask? Apparently he bears a vague resemblance to one guy in this week's movie. Once. Barely. In our next sketch, Joel and the bots form the Rip Taylor Trio and proceed to make all the eye jokes they possibly can in honor of the terrifying eye creatures. And not just vocal quips like President Eisenhower. No, we also get the visual gags MST3K is famous for. Enormous Visine bottles, glasses with many, many, many lenses come out, as well as a bucket for the eye drool. Eye drool? We can learn more at the Tropicana when the Rip Taylor Trio appears next. The closing sketch brings us to the thesis statement about the makers of this movie. They just did not care. Noting the creature costumes had visible zippers and some had only headpieces visible, these filmmakers just didn't care. The filming in broad daylight to create night scenes. Yeah, they just didn't care. The Mads won't have it, though. They have Larry Buchanan right there, wearing that staple of the 90s, the I'm with stupid shirt. And while they try to defend the movie, they also conclude Larry Buchanan just didn't care. The end. The eye creatures!
Had you in fact seen this episode before?
So I totally had seen this episode, but completely forgot. And I didn't realize that I had seen it until they did the They Just Didn't Care sketch. As soon as I saw that sketch, I was like, oh, I have seen this. I have totally seen this episode because I remember that sketch. But I didn't remember any other part of the episode, which is kind of sad because it's really entertaining.
It is, but yeah, that's the last moment of the episode.
Okay, so it took me an hour and a half to realize I'd seen the episode before. This is sort of like reading a book and getting to page 200 and being like, oh, I have read this. I do know who the killer is. Who knew? Who knew?
See, I had this moment where I remembered one or two things about the episode, about the movie, like the sweater dress. I remembered that, but I had thought, oh, this is an episode I haven't seen that many times. And then I started watching it and I was like, oh no, I know every beat of this episode. I totally know this. I just forgot these were all from this episode.
And there's some really fantastic beats inside of here as well.
Oh, yeah. No, this is a really good episode. I did not remember this being so good. It wasn't in my mental, like, top 20 list or something, but maybe it should be.
Well, I think maybe it's because, like, number one, you're expecting an attack. It was sort of promised in the title. Number two, you're expecting eye creatures. It was promised in the title. And those creatures don't look like eye creatures. I'm with them on saying they killed the Michelin Man because it looks way more like the Michelin Man than it does like eye creatures. I don't know.
Did you have any favorite jokes or favorite moments?
One of the things that I miss while watching MST3K through a streaming service is all the commercials that used to be on inside of the 90s. Because when I watched an episode like this with you, it would have been on one of the home tapes that you made. And I just noticed all throughout watching the movie, they were making comments about, like, so many of their riffs were about commercials, like the Michelin Man and like Calgon, take me away, and things like that. I just appreciated that so much as we were going through it. Also, there was one where they said, Stanley, get me a hammer, which I don't know if that's a reference to Stanley hammers. Maybe it is. So, but just things like that. I miss watching those silly 90s commercials that were on Comedy Central.
I think Stanley Get Me a Hammer is a Laurel and Hardy reference. I think.
That's an even better reference than a commercial reference. No question about that.
Yes, but more importantly, we don't tend to link to things that are on YouTube that probably shouldn't be. But I will say, if you search for Broadcast Editions MST3K, you will find that some good person has uploaded versions of the MST3K episodes as taped off TV back in the day, including this episode, which has never been on DVD. So if you want to watch it, that would be a way to do it. Just saying, hopefully it'll still be there by the time you hear about this. In fact, I think the note under it says, why, yes, I do upload this episode a lot. So I think it keeps getting taken down, which is all the more reason for us not to link to it. But yeah, it is a lot of fun to watch it with the commercials. Sometimes I'll do that for this show. Usually I can remember those commercials well enough. I do want to shout out one of my favorite moments. It's really early in the episode when the Mads are showing off their invention of the Ouija board woodcutter thing.
Mm-hmm.
And there's this great moment from Dr. Forrester, this perfect trace joke, in which they're talking about how a lot of woodworkers are dead. And Dr. Forrester says, not meant as a criticism, but it's true. And it's just the perfect delivery of that non-joke line.
Yes.
It's so funny. And it's so trace. And it's just, every time I ended up rewatching that while getting ready for this episode, I cracked up again and again. I love it. Trace is good.
Trace is good. There's no question about it. And I should say, I really, really like Kinga and Max, son of TV's Frank. I like their not hidden animosity between each other and between, I don't know, everything. But I enjoy also just the slapstick fun that Dr. Forrester and TV's Frank have. Like they're clearly having a really good time. So I miss having them as the Mads in some ways.
There's also a really great moment early on after they come back from the very first commercial when they've done the We're Best Friends, Now I Hate You bit. And Crow is hiding behind Joel as Tom is making fun of him and is sort of peeking out. It's some amazing puppeteering work. But one of the things that I also thought with that is that the aspect ratio makes a huge difference here, because in the 4:3 old TV standard, the host and the bots had to be super close to each other. Whereas now to fill up the screen during the Netflix era, the widescreen era, everybody's really spread out. And it's a lot less intimate. They're not up in each other the way that they used to be. I think that's a shame.
Yeah, and certainly they knew back then how to take advantage of those sorts of things, right? I mean, it is certainly part of that sketch that Tom is going on and on about how horrible Crow is. And Crow's right there listening the entire time. You can see it, but he can't. And, they're clearly taking advantage of the set as it's designed. And they know what they're filming and what it's going to look like for their audience, which is always fantastic. Oh, I also wanted to shout out the Gaussian equation quote.
Oh, yes.
I mean,
do you want to explain that one for people who haven't watched the episode?
I mean, I feel like we don't get a lot of really hardcore math jokes inside of our MST3K very often. They really are making more pop cultural references. But in this case, the two of the characters who are not main characters are making out, and the female character feels like they're being watched. And she's like, I just feel like, and then Tom comes on and is like, Gaussian equations are flawed due to their strict Euclidean view of the universe. And it's so beautiful. It's really quite beautiful. And I don't feel like I want to explain the mathematics behind that. I totally feel like that's something that listeners should look up if they're interested in something like that. Just to say, of course, that, Gauss and Euclid are famous mathematicians and they're worth looking up on their own.
We'll do a segment about them someday, but not today.
Alas.
Now I'm afraid we have to talk a little bit about the movie.
Oh, okay. We can talk about the movie. The movie was not as bad as I thought it was going to be, but I'm not sure I would want to watch it unmisted. But you know more about it than I do.
Well, I guess I know a little bit more about it. To say the movie is not that bad is probably the highest compliment the director Larry Buchanan ever received in his career. I don't know. Maybe that's unfair. But I did ask around with some of our bad movie loving friends and looked at the times that we've mentioned Larry Buchanan on previous episodes. So Adam and other people seem to agree that you really don't want to do a deep dive into this guy's filmography.
Fair enough.
But he does seem like an interesting person. And in 1996, he wrote an autobiography called It Came from Hunger, Tales of a Cinema Schlockmeister.
Whoa.
Which I decided to read for this episode.
You are a good man, Chris. Good man.
Well, let me just say, it's very readable. Like, it's a perfectly affable, readable little overview. It's short, it's quick, it's conversational, it's very nice. If anybody has any interest in Larry Buchanan or Z-movie type stuff, like, go for it. It's not bad. So Larry Buchanan is known for making a lot of really notorious good, bad films. So bad they're good. Although, then again, a lot of our friends who are into those kinds of films seem to think, maybe they're just bad. But he has an interesting life, or at least the start of it seems really sort of interesting and normal in a certain sense. In that you get the sense that he was just like anyone else who's trying to make it up in Hollywood, having interesting events and encounters until something changes and he goes down an entirely different path. He grew up in Texas. He gets the bug for movies when he's about 14. That just becomes his driving passion. And so when he finishes high school, he's 18, he decides to hitchhike to LA. And, he bums around for a few years with some limited luck. He gets a few parts, does a few things. But after a few years, he decides, let's try New York instead. And he moves out to New York City and has a bit more luck there.
So he hitchhikes to LA, doesn't make it in LA, so he presumably finds some way to get to New York, possibly also hitchhiking. Why didn't he write On the Road? I think I would have enjoyed it more.
Maybe. I mean, let me put it this way. He does come off as a kind of a nice narrator, but he is, much like the characters in his movie, a little weird about sex stuff.
Ooh, okay.
So, for example, let me read you a little bit. He's been in New York City for just a little while, and he says, my enchantment with the Big Apple was fading fast. But then came another one of those mini miracles after 3 days of eating at the Automat, which is a classic cheap diner thing where you put your coins in the machine and you'd open a little door and pull out a plate with pre-made food on it.
And reference in Diamonds Are a Girl's Best Friend.
Indeed. So anyway, after eating at the Automat, I took my last 10 spot, $10 bill, feeling very brave, and headed for a recommended but pricey eatery. It was the dining room of the Hotel des Artistes in the West 60s off Central Park. This place had, and I presume still has, the sexiest murals in Manhattan. The service there was heavy silver, and the color of the linens was what back home we called titty pink. Yep.
Sorry.
No, it's one of those things which is very funny and upsetting at the same time.
Wow. Yes.
And I will let you know, those sexy murals are still up.
How did you not take me to them when we were ever in New York together?
I didn't know about them. Also, I don't want to have dinner surrounded by naked women murals.
With titty pink napkins.
I mean, I don't know. I don't think the service still has the titty pink tablecloths, although I think you can find some pictures. You can find pictures of these all over the place. And it is now a restaurant called The Leopard, and it still has these like nature scenes of nymphs, wood nymphs, I guess. It's naked ladies dousing themselves in a river. It's it's exactly what you think it is. I don't want to say they're tasteful, but they're not raunchy.
Wow. And how does he get from there to making movies like this?
Well, when he's at the place, he meets somebody who turns out to be able to land him a job at a modeling agency. This gets him some summer Broadway gigs, some TV gigs. He gets to be in a training film for the Signal Corps called Homer Gets Hygienic, which I need to track down. It also means that he meets a bunch more interesting people, including a very young Stanley Kubrick.
Shut up. He does not.
Stanley Kubrick offers to be the cinematographer for Larry Buchanan's first movie, a one-reeler, which is called Apache Gold or Grub Stake, that he's about to film for almost no money out in the West Texas.
Did you say Apache Gold or Grub Stake? Is that like a tagline for the movie? That seems like two very, very different ideas.
It's released under two different names.
Okay, thank you.
But apparently Kubrick wanted too much money, so he had to say no to him. But wow. But before you get too sad for Larry Buchanan's first one-reeler film, he manages to get an actor who's also just started working and is also having trouble breaking into the biz, Jack Klugman.
Oh, wow. Crow would be so happy they worked together.
Yeah, by all reports, the film is not very good, but, it's showing that he could do it. Eventually, he meets a woman, they have a kid, they move back to Texas because New York is no place to raise a kid.
Not with murals like that.
Exactly. And he ends up working for a film development, like a lab in Dallas, and does these sort of odd jobs occasionally. For example, he gets hired by a Texas oil man to make a movie starring the oil man's mistress, who's got kind of notions of being a star.
Yeah, that's par for the course right there.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. The requests are that Buchanan keeps the oil man's name out of it, not to film it anywhere near where he lives, with his wife, etc., and to just take the money and do a good job. So he makes a film called Venus in Furs.
Hold up. Venus in Furs? Based on the Marquis de Sade's famous work?
Yep. In the movie, de Sade picks up our hero from the streets and tortures her a bunch.
Oh.
And she escapes. So he makes the film, he finishes editing the film in a week, and he screens it with the oil man in a private screening that is just the two of them.
Mm-hmm.
The oil man loves the film.
What? Takes
the negative from Larry Buchanan, drives out with him, I guess, and dumps it into Lake Dallas because the woman has already left him.
Oh, I mean, heartbreaking, but not heartbreaking when your mistress leaves you. And, what could we have expected from that cinematic masterpiece that is now lost to time and the waters of Texas?
Well, this is what Larry Buchanan says he learned from it. Other than the very welcome fee, I profited from learning certain valuable lessons from Venus in Furs. One such lesson, never taught in film schools, is the gender of film. I am convinced that gender is female. Consider that an actress, say Emma Thompson, with reasonably prepossessing looks and some talent, can sit absolutely motionless on rolling film, and the scene will hold. There need be no overt physical action. On the other hand, should Sly Stallone not move for equal duration, the scene would be suspect and provoke derisive laughs. The difference is that we almost hear Emma thinking, whereas Stallone has gone on cerebral hold. The camera is kind to the female form. This is remarkably verified in scenes of near nudity wherein something is withheld. Sophisticates who would be turned off by unvarnished pornography are pleasantly stimulated by tastefully directed erotica.
Oh my God, I don't see how that proves that film is female. It seems like that just really confirms the male gaze. My goodness.
It really does. It's really... Oh, God, what an idiot.
That's not very kind.
But he learns from Venus' Furs that there's some money to be made in sexploitation films for drive-ins, and he makes a few of those, and this leads to his films being distributed by American International Pictures, who we've encountered several times on this show.
Oh, yes, and will again.
So then we get to the point where this movie comes from. He gets a contract to remake pictures for AIP, for American International, so that they can sell them to color television, right? Because their schlock movies have sold reasonably well at reasonable prices to TV, but now they want color stuff because color television is all the rage. So make them dirt cheap, make them in color, and make them at this length.
Well, but that works really well for MST3K looking for movies to actually be able to riff where they don't have to cut it down too much.
Yeah, so this is the first one of these that he makes, originally called The Eye Creatures, of course. As you can tell from that opening graphic, the attack of the is added much later. And it's a remake of the film Invasion of the Saucer Men.
What? That makes even less sense for the actual, costume they're wearing.
The studio demanded that John Ashley be the lead. And you might remember That in our last episode on Beyond Atlantis, I talked about how his wife had divorced him and then he moved to the Philippines to get away from it all.
Mhm.
This is the movie he's making while his wife tells him no.
This movie is the one that drives him to the Philippines. Interesting.
Not all of the films that he makes are going to be like this, but he makes several of them. For example, his next film is called High Yellow, and it has Cynthia Hull, who's our female lead from this movie, the woman with the big hair.
The daughter of the sheriff?
Mm-hmm. You'll be very excited to know that in High Yellow, she plays a black woman.
Oh, yes, I'm terribly, terribly excited. When you said High Yellow, I'm like, oh, so everybody's going to be in yellowface inside of this movie. It's going to be awesome. But no, apparently it's not yellowface that they're using.
No, nor are they using blackface because, quote, although she was not of African ancestry, she had a dusky and expressive quality that made her ideal for a girl passing. She's supposed to be, quote unquote, mixed race in the movie.
Quote, dusky.
Yes.
Wow.
Yep. Then he remade It Conquered the World in color. You remember In Conquered the World? We covered it a long time ago. It's the, He Learned Too Late That Man is a Feeling Creature movie.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
He was asked to make it for a third of the original film's budget, and he brought in John Agar, who we talked about in our episode on Revenge of the Creature, and the movie that resulted from that was called Zontar, the Thing from Venus.
Wow. Zonkar, huh? Mm-hmm.
Zontar.
Zontar. Oh, whoa. Okay. Yeah. Different.
That might also be his most famous film. I'm not sure. He also eventually made movies called Mars Needs Women and It's Alive with a little actor called Tommy Kirk.
I love Tommy Kirk.
Yes, of course, Tommy Kirk from Catalina Caper and Village of the Giants. Apparently, John Ashley was supposed to star in Mars Needs Women, but he was busy. The studio foisted Tommy Kirk on him, which he didn't particularly want, but it seems like it worked out in the end.
For both of them. Because I've heard of Mars Needs Women, but I haven't heard of the movie that you said was his most known movie, which I can't even recall the title of right now. And you just said it 2 minutes ago.
Zontar, the Thing from Venus. How can you forget that?
I don't know. I even said the word out loud and I didn't remember it long enough to quote it.
So it's interesting how Larry writes about this, I think.
About Mars Needs Women or about working with Tommy Kirk?
About working with Tommy Kirk. And I think it really gets at what I find interesting about him and what I often find interesting about these kinds of movies or this aspect of the business, let's say. He says, almost every, quote, star farmed out and sent to me in Dallas by American International Pictures was suffering from some crisis of emotional trauma or sexual identity. These difficulties took the form of alcoholism, homosexuality, substance abuse, and a panoply of ills, real and imagined. My operation came to be known by some cruel wiseacres as Buchanan's Clinic, much like that named after Betty Ford, only my facility covered the whole spectrum of the human condition. On reflection, and armed with the clarity of hindsight, I now know that my nickname of Dr. Buchanan was a compliment.
Oh, well, it's nice that he could view it that way in retrospect. I can't imagine it was easy at the time.
No, he says, when Kirk stepped off the plane in Dallas in 1966 to start production, I knew three things about him. He was a disciplined actor, he was into drugs, and he was a homosexual. If film was truly therapeutic, he seemed like a classic candidate. And it does seem like they made the two movies, and then sort of that gave Tommy Kirk the space to keep working, but kind of get a little bit more of his life back together. Tommy Kirk would later describe the movies as just an abomination and that he doesn't fully understand how he got roped into making them.
Oh.
But that Larry Buchanan was a really great guy to work with.
Oh, well, that's nice.
So maybe there's something to that. I mean, again, from Larry Buchanan's perspective, it seems like the movies are not so much about the end product as it is the process of making them.
Well, I certainly hope so, because the movies themselves are no great thing. But if the actors got something out of being there and he got something out of being there, it wasn't a total waste of time.
Yeah. And it seems like he was just excited to make movies. Like he never held out for more money. He would try to make as much money as he could from potential investors so he'd be able to make as good a movie as he could. But he would make the movie with no matter how much money he had at the end of that process. He wouldn't like put off a movie for several years trying to get enough money to make the vision actually happen, because making the movie was kind of the thing. And that's going to lead to some really bad movies. but it's kind of a lovely way to live your life.
Well, I mean, you always have work if you're not waiting for work to start.
You are keeping busy. Yes,
Well, and in the film industry, if you don't make something and put something out, you're forgotten and you don't get to make things. So I understand his philosophy there.
exactly. And somehow Larry Buchanan has not been forgotten.
Hey everybody, it's time for the Shallow 13.
It's time for the Shallow 13. 13 blink and you'll miss 'em details about today's experiment, Attack of the Eye Creatures. Go, Charlotte, go!
Our movie begins with an Air Force officer being shown a very, 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 very realistic film of aliens landing on Earth. The narrator of that film within a film, an uncredited Peter Graves from A&E's biography, as well as the star of American International Pictures' picture, It Conquered the World. Crow makes a joke about this, but it's unclear whether he realizes it's actually Peter Graves or just thinks it's an incredible simulation.
Remember the two Air Force guys who are peeping on Makeout Point? One of them, the one who isn't quite so camp, was played by Tony Houston, who would appear in a few of Larry Buchanan's films and who also wrote the screenplay for The Hellcats, riffed in Season 2.
Tony Houston is, surprise, surprise, the brother of Angelica Houston and the son of John Houston. Houston eventually became a lawyer and mostly left the creative side of the industry, though his script for the 1987 adaptation of James Joyce's story The Dead, starring his sister and directed by his father, did get nominated for some awards.
The hero of our movie, by which I mean Old Man Bailey, is played by Ethan Allan. Ethan Allan was in a small handful of movies, all but one of which were directed by Larry Buchanan, but he happens to share his name with Ethan Allen, who in the 1700s helped found Vermont and then participated in the American Revolution.
A few hundred years later, two guys would buy out a furniture store in Vermont and rename it Ethan Allen, after the Revolutionary War patriot who was not, in fact, a furniture maker. This may be why the Mads' attempts to contact Ethan Allen with their router Ouija board turn out a little funny.
And by the way, Homer Formby, who Crow hopes they'll contact next, was a woodworker whose smiling face appeared on cans of Formby's Furniture Refresher. Formby was indeed still alive when this episode was made, and seems to still be alive, inasmuch as I couldn't find an obituary for him. But his refresher, alas, has been sold to Minwax.
The Mads sign off their invention exchange by saying that
Next week, we will demonstrate the Lathe of Heaven.
The Lathe of Heaven is a 1971 novel by Ursula Le Guin, which was made into a surprisingly good TV movie by the same company that made Season 8's Overdrawn at the Memory Bank.
When the title card, with its infamous repeated "the" appears, Joel asks,
Attack of the Eye Creatures. Did Mel Tillis write these titles or what?
Mel Tillis was a country singer who had a stutter when he talked. So, that's the reference. His country career peaked in the 70s, but Misty's might know him best for his appearances in films like Cannonball Run, Cannonball Run 2, and Smokey and the Bandit 2.
At the very end of the very, 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 very realistic Air Force film about the aliens, the lieutenant watching the film is told to
Take off to the Great White North.
Joel is, of course, riffing on SCTV's Bob and Doug McKenzie, and specifically their song with Geddy Lee from Rush, Take Off.
Turns out, Rick Moranis, aka Bob McKenzie, and Geddy Lee went to elementary school together? Wild. Anyway, Take Off charted higher on the US Billboard singles charts than any of Rush's songs, making it Geddy Lee's most successful hit.
Susan gets exhausted from John Ashley's non-stop making out and says,
Whoa, take it easy. Not so fast. I'm out of breath.
Calling Susan Faludi, calling Susan Faludi.
Susan Faludi is the author of the 1991 book Backlash, which detailed the media's tactics in undermining feminist arguments. The book became a much-discussed sensation, though of course it received plenty of its own backlash.
As the hero of this movie, Old Man Bailey, loads his shotgun, getting ready to take aim at some smoochers, Tom riffs,
We now join Ernest Hemingway at his home in Ketchum, Idaho.
You know, sometimes people say that the Joel era is less dark than the Mike era. Anywho, this is a joke about the writer Ernest Hemingway taking his own life in 1961 with a shotgun he'd purchased at, a little store called Abercrombie & Fitch.
On a happier note, Earl Holliman, who John Ashley kind of looks like, I guess? He was on Policewoman and later on the short-lived Delta Burke sitcom Delta, as I mentioned at the top, and he'd been in a lot of westerns and so forth. He even had a small role in Forbidden Planet and was in 1979's Good Luck, Miss Wyckoff with, you guessed it, Donald Pleasance. Anyway, he's still alive. At time of recording, he's 93, and you've still got time to send him a card for his next birthday on September 11th. Oh.
And that's time.
Chris, I've noticed that there's a lot of Larry references inside of the show that we're watching right now. We have Larry Buchanan, our director. We also have a riff about Larry and his brother Daryl and his other brother Daryl a little bit early on in the film.
From the 90s Newhart show.
Yes,
Newhart?
absolutely.
Bob Newhart show? Which one was that one?
I think it was the Bob Newhart show, but I would really have to look it up to double check.
I cannot believe he got away with having
2 shows named after him.
Newhart, the Bob Newhart show, and Bob, 3 shows named after him.
Didn't Lucille Ball get the exact same thing? Or did she only have 2?
She had I Love Lucy, the Lucy show. I think she did have a 3rd one.
I think she did.
We've really already gone off on a tangent here.
Haven't we already? It's so true. Sorry
Life with
about
Lucy. And here's Lucy. She's had 4.
Well, never mind. She beats Bob Newhart then. Hands down. Awesome. But I was talking about Larry's. Larry Buchanan, Larry as seen on the Bob Newhart show. And then also we have the wonderful, wonderful reference to Lawrence Welk.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thank you, boys.
That's fairly early inside of the movie when they're inside of the diner where so much objectification of women happens. It's amazing. It happens in such a short time.
Yes, it's right before Joel apologizes for the entire male gender. Does that include apologizing for Lawrence Welk?
I don't think so. So Lawrence Welk is like this really clean-cut character, and not just clean-cut inside of his persona in his TV show or in his touring or in his music. So he made sweet music, right? Instead of like the hot music of Benny Goodman. I mean, right.
Yes, he made the champagne music as opposed to the, I don't know what you would call it, lager music of Benny Goodman. Benny Goodman's not exactly the bathtub gin of music.
No, absolutely not. But you have Lawrence Welk, who is very much like this lighter fare. And he didn't, he was on TV at a time when something like American Bandstand would have been on as well. And he's playing renditions of songs and not having the actual artists on, right? And not having them perform their hits, quote unquote, live. He's reimagining them with the band that he has and the performers that he has into this, smooth, sweet champagne sound, rather than letting those songs be what they really are. But he's still playing current hits on his show, as opposed to only doing the big band things of his youth.
Yeah, so he was the Kids Bop of his era.
I guess so. What a horrible thing to think, though. I mean, but he wasn't branding it for kids, right? He was
No.
He was branding it for this very specific audience that was watching his show. And he was on the air forever, right? He started his show on TV in 1951 on a local TV station, and then was picked up in 1955 by ABC and was on the air all the way through 1982.
Yeah.
Which is amazing. And, and I should say, he's not off the air, technically, right? You can still watch him weekly on PBS. He is still on PBS. They still promote him during pledge drives and everything.
Oh, yeah. But now if you're watching it, it's like it's been repackaged and it's all being introduced by like the Welklings, his grandchildren or whatever. And it's kind of awkward. I don't know. I would rather just watch the old episodes in their entirety than see one of his descendants be like, "Oh, Lawrence Welk was always such a," and just these lovely speeches about how wonderful everybody was, and then cut to Joanne Castle doing her thing.
Oh my gosh, Joanne Castle as a pianist was always one of my favorite parts of the show because, spoiler alert, I watched the Lawrence Welk show growing up with my family. My father loves the show. My father, right? I'm not talking about my grandparents, who I'm sure also liked the show, or my great-grandparents who loved the show. My father, who is not of the generation who is supposed to love this show, right? He is supposed to be the generation who rejects the Lawrence Welk show, and yet he loved it. Loved it.
Yeah, I guess so. I mean, my mother also loved the show, and she's similarly a boomer.
Yes. In fact, born in the same month as my father.
There you go. Yeah, and I also saw it a bit as a kid. I don't think we were as religious viewers as your family was.
Yeah, my family was more.
Yeah, I talked about Lawrence Welk briefly a long time ago in our episode on Robot Monster. But now that you're here, I was excited to have the opportunity to talk a bit more about it. Please, for our listeners who are not as familiar with the Lawrence Welk show, tell us about some of your favorite performers on the show.
Oh, absolutely. Well, I already mentioned Joanne Castle. She was a piano player who would be on an upright piano that they would decorate to the nines. She would be wearing a whole Scottish tartan and kilt, and then her whole piano would be covered in anything they could think of that was vaguely related to Scotland. It was amazing.
But she'd still be playing it honky tonk.
Oh, absolutely. Yes, she would still be playing something like, yeah, anyway, it was amazing. But I loved her. She was very entertaining. My father always talked about Bobby Burgess, who was one of the dancers on the show, because here's this guy, that clean-cut guy who lives this charmed life, who gets to be on the Mickey Mouse show, and now he's on the Lawrence Welk show for 50 years, and he gets to dance, and he's not a very good dancer, Chris. But it doesn't matter because he's clearly having a very good time. He's clearly very happy with what he's doing. So Norma Zimmer and Joe Feeney, who are two of the vocalists that he had, were the ones where they would come on and would just be like, "Oh my God, I can't believe we have to listen to this person. No, what are they singing now?" And
Joe Feeney was the most Irish you could be. And specifically, I mean Irish American. But would come out and sing Danny Boy in the most Danny Boy manner.
Which is astonishing because there are some really Irish Danny Boy songs out there and he trumps them all.
Absolutely.
But I mean, Lawrence Welk was also kind of a pioneer in what he had on the show. Arthur Duncan, who was the tap dancer that he has on his show, was only the second African American to be a regular on any primetime television show when he was hired onto the show in 1964, which seems amazing to me, number one, that it took until 1964 for that to happen, but that it would happen on the Lawrence Welk show, which, if somebody has a stereotype about Lawrence Welk, it is that it is one of the whitest shows out there. In fact, that's the joke that Joel makes when they're going into the cafe before they make the wonderful, wonderful reference, right? He's like, "It's where Whitey goes to listen to Whitey music," or whatever it is that he says. It's astonishing. And it's yes, that is exactly the stereotype that we have for Lawrence Welk.
Well, and it's interesting because Arthur Duncan had been a regular on another show previously, on The Betty White Show in 1954.
Oh, I didn't know that, actually. How amazing.
Yeah, it was hugely controversial. He was the first Black person to be a series regular on a talk show, and the South hated it.
I can imagine, yes.
And apparently the producers kept that controversy away from him, which is astonishing and pretty good.
That seems amazing that they could protect him from that kind of backlash. I mean, you can imagine now that would be an absolutely impossible task.
Oh, yeah, no. No, Twitter has ruined all that. Now, this episode has a rather infamous riff based on the 14th century English hermit, mystic, and religious writer Richard Rowley, or as his friends like to call him, Rick Roll.
I'm never gonna give you up, never gonna let you down, never gonna fall.
I remember this reference coming up in the movie, and I thought, oh my gosh, how unfair that I just got rickrolled by MST3K.
You sort of got rickrolled. All right, so yes, at one point during the movie, there's a riff where Joel starts breaking out into that beloved song. And, 2008, a YouTube video calls it the first Rickroll, which is very funny because Rickrolling as a thing was still pretty fresh and new back then.
I would imagine so. I mean, it seems really weird that would be the case because Rick Astley was a recording artist in the 80s.
I mean, yeah, I very much remember him.
Totally. But it's amazing to me that it took like 20 years for him to... Number one, it's amazing to me that he came back 20 years later as a meme. Like, why Rick Astley?
That's a great question. It seems to be the case that the kids found out about Rick Astley and thought it was very funny that a guy with such a baby face had such a deep voice.
That was the case at the time he came out in the 80s as well. I think it's half of the reason why people took another listen to the songs that he was playing. I mean, it had the perfect 80s mystique going on for that.
Sure. But yeah, I guess that's why people who didn't grow up with it in the 80s sort of latched onto it in the early 2000s. It's interesting that, like, the Rickroll proper is supposed to be a bait and switch, right? You give somebody a link, and then the link actually leads to the video for Never Gonna Give You Up.
Never gonna give you up.
Yeah, we know how it goes. And so I feel like, in a sense that this isn't really the first Rickroll because it's a reference to it. It's not a bait and switch. It's not like you're supposed to expect something's going to happen now, but then actually Never Gonna Give You Up plays. Like so many things, this first popped up on terrible internet place 4chan.
Ooh.
And apparently it replaced an earlier practical joke known as duck rolling, where instead of being sent to Never Gonna Give You Up, you would be sent to an image of a duck with big wheels.
I have to admit, I've never been duck rolled, but I have been rickrolled many times.
Do you remember the first time you were rickrolled?
Ooh, it's really hard for me to think back to the very first time I was rickrolled because I think I knew of the phenomenon of rickrolling before it happened to me for the first time, right? And it was definitely in some sort of an email from a coworker. Like, there's no question that that's how it happened, right? And I was working at a high school at the time, so that's not the proper use of public services materials and emails. Come on. Do you remember the first time you were rickrolled, Chris?
I do, because it was almost exactly the opposite situation. I was chatting with a friend, and he sent me this link to something, and I clicked on it, and it was Never Gonna Give You Up. And I was like, oh, I said to him, I haven't thought of this song in a long time. It's a pretty good song now that I think about it for the first time in 20 years.
Sure.
And he was like, no, I rickrolled you. And I was like, you what now? And then he had to explain that, no, you were supposed to, I tricked you into watching this video. And I was like, oh, okay. I don't feel tricked. I feel like you just reminded me of a popular song from my childhood.
Sure, that doesn't seem like something you wouldn't share with somebody who you were friends with.
Yeah, no, we talked about music all the time. It was totally normal for us to talk about, I don't know, the early 90s hits of Alanis Morissette or whatever.
So why not go 5 years earlier and hit that Rick Astley next time? Why not?
I had no idea. And having someone explain to you that you've been rickrolled really doesn't land.
Well, yeah. Say. If you're explaining the punchline, you sort of miss the joke opportunity, right?
If you're explaining that a joke just occurred to you.
Yes. Most definitely. I have to say that one of my favorite instances of rickrolling, which I found when I was looking up rickrolling for this segment, was in 2010, the Oregon legislature had a series of representatives stick small lyrics from the Rick Astley song into the speeches that they were given on the floor. And there's a fantastic YouTube video that clips all of them together in the order of the song. And I currently live in Oregon, and my current representative is one of the people in the video. I think he might have just earned my vote again just for that. Chris, I think we've talked a lot about the eye creatures and their so-called attack. Do you have a final factoid for us to share with our listeners?
Yeah, I do. There's a little moment I want to put a spotlight on, which is there's a bit of violin playing that happens at one point in the movie, and it sets up Tom to say,
Well, they get Charlie Chaplin to write the music?
and so I thought maybe we would do a little micro scorner all about Charlie Chaplin, the composer.
Oh.
Now, you knew Charlie Chaplin, the actor.
Absolutely, yes.
You knew The Little Tramp and whatnot.
Uh-huh.
You know Charlie Chaplin, the director.
Yes.
You may also know that he wrote his movies.
Many of them. Did he write all of his movies?
He wrote most of his big films. He may have done a few other films that he didn't write, but most of his most famous works he wrote. And he also composed the music for most of them.
I wouldn't have known that.
Ah, so here's an interesting thing. Charlie Chaplin grew up playing the violin and a few other instruments. He couldn't read music. He never had been sort of formally trained. So he would compose by getting people who knew the technical sides of things and then sort of play or hum the melodies he wanted at them.
Well, it totally seems the kind of thing he would do because he'd want the music to be accentuating whatever physical comedy was happening.
Exactly. And while he found the switch into the talkie era, the sound era, to be a little bit not quite what he wanted out of films, he was not entirely trusting it at first. Nevertheless, it did mean that he could control one more element. He wouldn't be the piano player or whatever in the music hall playing whatever music they wanted. He could control that aspect of it. So his increased auteur vision came in, which, take that, Orson Welles. I think it would be fair to say that Charlie Chaplin music is best described by one word, and that word is sentimental.
That's not what they're referring to inside of the MST3K riff, though.
Oh, it is.
Oh, it's the sentimentality?
Oh, because it's a violin who's playing this very schmaltzy, like Italian restaurant music, if you want to say. It's got that feel. It's coming from that era. It's using a lot of rubato. It's, slowing up and speeding down at various moments, just sort of pull out all sorts of emotion from it. It's, using that kind of harmonic language and so forth. It's very schmaltzy. It's very sentimental. And it's very good at that, if that's what you're looking for. And that's what he did.
If you've been affected by the issues on this show, if you want to share your favorite Lawrence Welk memory, or if you'd like to ask us anything, get in touch with us. Our website is itsjustashow.com, and we're on Twitter at itisjustashow. We'd love to hear from you. This show is made possible by listeners like you, and like our newest supporter, Chris. No relation. Thank you, Chris. For as little as $1 an episode, you can be like Chris and help us research and record this show. You can join us in a friendly Slack where we all hang out and live stream our reactions to new episodes. And you can listen to all of our superfan bonus bits. Find out more at itsjustashow.com/Patreon or patreon.com/itsjustashow. And if you want to follow up on anything that was mentioned today, you'll find links in our show notes at itsjustashow.com/episode/113. Well, Chris, I think our eyes are wide shut at this point for Attack of the Eye Creatures. What are we going to be watching next?
Well, it's time to go back to Season 8. As you know, we've been trying to work through the season in order to appreciate all of the continuity of the plot. I think this is a perfectly fine place for you to get onboarded onto that as we go to Season 8, Episode 15, Agent for HARM, or Harm.
So I have to admit, Chris, I have never seen this episode. Again, that sci-fi era is something that I just don't have a lot of contact with. And of course, I'm going to be stepping in the middle of this storyline. So as usual, you're going to have to help me out with where we are in that continuity.
I actually haven't seen this episode before either. Supposed to be a TV pilot for a new series, but wah wah.
I suppose a pilot for a TV series that never happened is better than 2 episodes of a TV show badly stitched together.
Yep, probably. We'll find out. But until then...
Don't let Old Man Bailey catch you on his land.
And I, too, would like to apologize for the entire male gender. Take it away, Theme Squad.
Wonderful, wonderful.